Hey, everybody. Welcome to this Dynasty Underdog production. That's what we're going to call it. Really excited to be here today and do something a little bit different than our normal Dynasty Underdog episodes. Billy Beeman here. You can catch me on Twitter at WillieBeemanDFF. Here with my buddy Jake. He's on Twitter at JakeAbrams. How you doing, man? Real quick before we hop into it.
I'm doing well. Really excited about a lot of the work that we put into this, and I just want to crank it out, man. Like, I want to get through this, and I want to be able to show it to everybody. Honestly, I'm so excited.
Yeah, absolutely. We've been talking about this a lot. We have been doing a good bit of work behind the scenes, both, just getting the rankings together and just kind of talking about, what we want to do here, kind of scripting out a little bit what we're trying to get across. And I think what we've come up with here is the Dynasty Underdog Personal Rankings Symposium. Okay. And I think it's a really fun idea. And I think that title kind of gets across what we're trying to do. And that's, I think, help members of the community better understand kind of how to utilize rankings, how to create rankings, what you should prioritize, with each position. Do tiers matter? Kind of a holistic view on rankings and how to go about using them and how to go about creating them. Because I think it's one of those things that is utilized a lot by members of our community. Most sites put out rankings, but I don't know if there's always a thorough explanation of the process behind how they're created. Is each ranker, going by the same process? Are they thinking the same? Are they just winging it? Is it all different? What is happening behind the scenes? What is going on? And I think that there's, a lack of understanding, but also a lack of transparency. Maybe it might not be on purpose, but I think it's just a nature of kind of rankings are a challenging topic. They are challenging to put together. And I think, going through just that entire process is not something everybody's willing to do or wants to do. But I think for us, with the audience that we've built and the audience that we are trying to reach, I think this is really topical because not everybody is an analyst. Not everybody is an analyst. So I think Jake and I are really excited to get into this. Do you have any comments before we jump into the nitty gritty here, Jake?
No, I think that's exactly why we're creating this. It really is an educational piece, almost a video library, if you will, to kind of assist with the process of how to go through this yourself and understand that your own process is supposed to be unique. You're supposed to be your own unique manager. You're supposed to take on each team in its own specific way, because the only way that you're going to be better than everybody else is by creating your own tools to be more competitive. If you base everything off of KTC or DTC or any other trade calculator out there, you're just going to be like everybody else, right? So the idea is, how do you make yourself unique in this process? How do you make yourself better than your competitors? And how do you win leagues at the end of the day? That's really what you're trying to do. And I think by the end of this video series, we'll be able to work through a way for you to naturally go through this and then kind of ask yourself the appropriate questions of, how do I tackle this myself? Plus, we'll be providing all the resources for you so you can actually work through our own rankings, our own tier system, so that you can kind of compare, contrast, and use other sources as well. So with that being said, let's kind of just hop into it. And I really just want to talk to you first and kind of just drive this narrative a little bit. But what is the value of creating your own rankings and tiers?
This is a great question. I think this gets the heart of like what we're doing here, what we're attacking here, right? And I think the value of creating your own rankings is getting a better understanding of how you value each player. It's not so much about getting the final order of your rankings, right? Because the order is going to change. It is going to change, but what it is about understanding, more so in groups, which is why we talk about tiers, and we'll get into that. But how you are valuing these players in comparison to the players that are going around them in ADP. And I think it's important to say that, because ADP matters. You're going to be drafting with other people in a league on a platform that is listing players, by an ADP. And when you're ranking players, you're going to say to yourself, do I agree with this? Do I agree with this valuation, this market evaluation, right? And then you're going to be able to place that player below or above that line. And it starts to really build a groundwork for you in understanding, how do I value, first of all, each position in relation to each other, and also how do I value each player in relation to each other, but also kind of where do they sit amongst the entire pool of players? How does that allow me to attack drafts differently? It's building that groundwork and gaining a full understanding of how I am valuing these players, because you can have a trade sent your way and you can say to yourself in your head, you can do kind of the back and forth and then you come to a conclusion, right? But when you do the rankings, like, you've done that work already for the most part. So when you go to make these decisions in drafts or in a trade, it becomes a lot easier. I think it becomes a lot less work and you become more efficient at it. And then you just end up kind of being ahead of your competition because you just have a more holistic understanding and background of all of the player values, especially if you're keeping up with your rankings. Doing it one time is certainly valuable, but keeping up with it is very important. And we'll get into why that is.
I really want to start thinking about our own rankings and what we've produced. And so why do you think it's important to kind of break down the differentiation between a rebuilder ranking and tiering system versus a contender ranking and tiering system?
This is something that was brought up in our Discord as well, right? Like, it's not something that we only think about. I'm sure many people have thought about this before, and they're like, I'm looking at your rankings and some of it doesn't make sense for my team build. It just doesn't kind of line up. And then think about it and you say to yourself, yeah, like, Tyreek Hill, I'm going to value slightly differently if I'm a contender. If I just lost the title and I'm going into next year and I have an opportunity to get Tyreek Hill, I think that you're going to view that a little bit differently than if you were bottom of the league looking to rebuild and you have the opportunity to get Tyreek Hill. You're just going to have a completely different perspective on it. So when thinking about, how we were going to create our rankings, I thought it was really important for us to make that distinction. And you can see it when you create the rankings. I mean, you're going to value the Drake Londons of the world, the Chase Browns of the world, right? The guys who haven't fully broken out in any meaningful way, but definitely, you see the opportunity there, right? You're going to prioritize those kind of players. Depending on my team build, I'm going to prioritize this player over this player in my rankings. So when you split it, it just allows you to kind of escape that challenge of being like, well, I gotta thread that needle, right? No, you don't have to thread that needle. Now we've made it so, we can prioritize when we're talking about rebuilder. These are true dynasty rankings. You're prioritizing youth. We're not throwing Tyreek Hill down to like the 8th round or anything like that. You're still prioritizing points in a way, but you can see that, you're really prioritizing that youth movement, that rebuild movement, and the contender rankings totally clash against that, right? And that they're prioritizing points. And I think it just allows you to really be able to go into your rankings and say, all right, based on my team build in this league, let me go look at this set of rankings so I can accurately judge like what I'm trying to do here. So here we have our Dynasty Underdog tiered rankings. We have them split by rebuilder and contender. Okay. And you'll notice slight differences just here in the top 22 that we're showing on screen when I go back and forth. And you're going to see a lot less differences at the top, which makes a lot of sense, right? Because again, we're not saying if you're a rebuilder, just take Anthony Richardson over Jalen Hurts, you know what I mean? Because Jalen Hurts has been in the league a couple years. Like, that's not what's happening here. Like, obviously at the top of our rankings, you're going to see a lot of similarities, prioritizing youth as edges in some spots, right? As tiebreakers in some spots for the rebuilder rankings, and kind of the opposite, prioritizing points for the contender ranking.
And one of the big things that I would like to kind of hone in on is the actual process itself, almost what Billy was talking about before. You're almost interacting with every single ranking as its own unique 1v1 trade, if that makes sense. Like, in its own process, when you're kind of looking at each player, you're saying to yourself, or even think of it as a startup, who would I take over the next person? And being able to kind of delineate that and go through that process is really beneficial, so that when you look at yourself versus the market, you can kind of see where those gaps are and where to take advantage of. If you think that you can value a player, even if it's as simple as, 5, 6, 7 rankings above KTC, take advantage of that. Take that market loss if you think it's a value win. As Billy says in almost probably like 2 or 3 pods out of every month, he wants to lose now to win later. That's exactly how you should look at it. And that's kind of why we're putting this out there for you to kind of learn from as well. And with that being said, because that's literally what we're talking about, and I love these really natural segues, What do you take away from comparing your own rankings with market value and sites like KTC or DTC, et cetera?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to stop sharing for a second here. This is like one of the most important pieces of the puzzle here. This is really where I think you gain the advantage, right? Because if you create yourself a really solid set of rankings and you're trying to be unbiased, you can go ahead, you can, and this is something I do think we may add to our rankings as well as we're talking about it. I do think I want to add, if I can, a market value column to our rankings, which would be able to show kind of, that KTC value next to where our rankings are. But one way or another, that's how I think you should use them. That's where you gain an advantage, and that's where you'll see the benefits, because you'll go to KTC, and we do this every week on the pod, and we look at our rankings and we say, why is this guy so high? Why is this guy so low? And I think obviously in a draft, the low ones, you're like, yes, like, why is this guy so low? You look at your rankings and you're like, we're in this round and he's here. Like, I need to go get him. And that's where you really are able to find some of those edges. So I think comparing it to KTC, it just allows you in real time to see your values versus KTC's values. It starts opening up a whole world to you, I think, that you wouldn't have had before when you go to KTC, and maybe sometimes those things, like, you can pick them out and you highlight them, but when you have your rankings, when you've done the work, it all lines up. It all kind of surfaces itself. You know what I mean? You're not really doing as much digging. And this is what I was talking about, making it a little bit more efficient for yourself, right? That's a lot of what this is about. Like, doing the legwork, mise en place, to use a term from cooking, right? Like, getting all your stuff together, that's like really important. That's what I think of this. This is like getting all your ducks in a row. So when you head into your drafts, when you head into a decision-making process, you're not doing any guesswork on your side, I guess, is a lot of what I'm trying to get across and what I'm trying to avoid.
That's exactly where I'm at as well, right? Like, I think one of the best parts about this exercise that we've done is I think Billy and I, for the most part, find ourselves very almost symbiotic in a way with a lot of our valuations. And one of the most unique processes, especially when you can compare values to another, that's why it's great to be making friends in the industry, in your leagues, across leagues. Being able to compare your values against people that you compete against is really beneficial for a lot of different reasons. But for the biggest one, I would say, is just to be able to really compare up against somebody that you also respect. Understanding what the market does is one thing, but like you learn with any other type of investment, whatever the market is doing, more often than not, is what you want to be going against. You want to be finding those small gaps, those valuations where you can go away from it. So for instance, I just want to bring up one example, a current one. We're shooting right now on January 26th, 2024. Jaden Reed is a great example. He's a person that's kind of falling on our own personal rankings for a lot of different reasons, but the biggest one I would say is just due to competition of target share. And I don't want to get involved in that wide receiver room, but I own a lot of him. So what have I been doing? I know that the market is crazy for him right now. I've been sending out a ton of offers for just, standard like 109 to 111-ish rounds, first round picks, because I think I can jump on that. I have a lot of those teams, other first rounders, pair those firsts together. I can jump all the way up to potentially the 103, 104 range, significantly better value than Jaden Reed, and probably whatever I was going to get at that 109, 110, whatever that would be. That's the type of way that I want to be starting to think about my own rankings and tiering system away from KTC, or in comparison to. And that's kind of the relationship that I see it. And with that being said, I think it's really important to start thinking about when's a good time to use your own personal rankings and tiering system. Like, is it in the off season? Is it during a startup? Is it during a rookie draft? Like, how do you kind of value the best times to start using this type of process?
Ideally, you're keeping up with your rankings year round. There's, different cycles. Maybe you go bi-weekly instead of weekly, monthly when it's really deep in the off season, maybe, and there's not much going on. More than anything, I feel like startups and comparing to ADP and comparing to KTC values, and that applies to trades for sure, is probably the most beneficial times to use your rankings. Really quick, I'm one to segue for sure, but I do want to highlight something that Jake was talking about here a second ago. Jaden Reed dropped 15 spots in our rankings. That's what he's talking about. And you can highlight that market inefficiency, we'll call it, right? And you can say, well, this has happened in our rankings, and maybe I agree with it to some degree, but definitely not that degree. So let me go out and buy a couple shares, and you can make these decisions, these kind of decisions. So I just wanted to highlight that point while I had the rankings up.
That's kind of where we're at, right? Like we're at this place where we want to try and present this process. It's not really a one size fits all. It's really more so a guide of how to go through your own unique journey on creating something that is beneficial for you to make yourself a more unique player in the space. I'm not out here trying to provide my gospel, let you know exactly how I feel about every single player. That isn't my purpose, because I'm not here to convince you on anything. The reality is that we want each individual player to be able to define that individual value for every single opportunity that they see, whether that is in the startup, whether that is trying to define what a rookie 102 looks like versus a Joe Burrow. Can you sell Joe Burrow straight up for the 102 if you really like Drake May or Jaden Daniels? Like, that's up to you to decide, not for us. But we're willing to put that out there and provide whatever guidance we can to go through this. And so lastly, and I think the way my brain was working there, is the adjusting process.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you adjust? When do you adjust? And what's kind of like that overarching like moment when it clicks to you of, I need to make this move? For instance, Jaden Reed, we'll start talking about him again. What was kind of the thing that clicked for you to like make that change for him? Why the sudden change?
Yeah, all the time adjusting. I think that's the answer to when is all the time. Why is much more challenging to answer. Because even looking at our rankings here, I think that we dropped Jaden Reed a bit too much just looking at the rankings. But the process there for me was kind of going in and looking at Dontavian Wicks, looking at how consistent Romeo Dobbs has been as a target earner, and then trying to work out, I guess, the Christian Watson, Jaden Reed part of this. So there's a lot going on there where it's just like, is there enough volume to go around? There's a lot of wide receivers in this room. And it's trying to decipher kind of where he truly fits in the rankings. And I think, part of your adjustment process is going to be sometimes over adjusting. But that's why doing these rankings and keeping up with them consistently is super important. I think that's the struggle and the challenge of like why you adjust is, some of the situations are a lot easier than others, where it's like, Lamar Jackson was a good one, right? Where he was a couple spots lower in my rankings. And I was like, yeah, but the rushing upside is there. He's kind of clicked finally with an offense that is better suited for him to elevate his game as a passer. Why is he not above CJ Stroud? Am I getting, a little bit of that like rookie fever, that rookie hype kind of thing going on? And why is he not above Jalen Hurts? Because I just think he's a better quarterback and a better player than Jalen Hurts, and it's those kind of decisions and thought processes that you're making. Like even in tight windows, you're having those self-reflections, those self-evaluations of like, do I need to raise this guy just 2 spots? It's not always like, why did I drop this guy 15 or move him up 15? I think it's also about, in those tight windows, making those moves. And I think it highlights again, like how challenging it is, but also the process we're trying to go through is really thorough. You're trying to think about every factor involved in this player's portfolio, and that's the struggle.
To provide a little glimpse into some other pretty wild jumps over the last few weeks, I think Khalil Shakir is another person that we've seen the opposite jump of, where there's a huge value gain for a very young wide receiver in a very potent offense where there's going to be a lot of wide receiver changes. There's a good chance that Stephon Diggs, Gabe Davis will all be gone. And someone like Khalil Shakir, who's now been in the offense for 2 years, will gain value going into year 3. So being able to rationalize those things without, Khalil Shakir is not going to be our wide receiver 7 by all means, but, jumping from the overall like total player 140 to maybe like somewhere in the range of 100, 110 is a more realistic wild jump, even though there's a lot of deviation in that change. That's kind of the way that I think we really want each individual to start thinking about this as they move forward and they work through the process. Are there any other items you want to bring up?
I think we covered this edition pretty thoroughly, just, reviewing why we rank, kind of what the importance is of what we're trying to get across here and what we want, the listeners and the viewers to be educated about.
Awesome. So we'll see you in episode 2. we're going to talk about how to actually work through the tiering process. We didn't really talk through that today, and I think it's really important to kind of leave each segment in its own brevity so that it makes a little bit more sense without going into too much detail. With that being said, thank you for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Catch you next time.